The Acrian fleet loomed over Earth. With a sense of finality, their ships dark and massive hovered in the skies, blocking out the sun, their technology far outclassing anything humanity had ever conceived of. With their towering machines and weapons of unimaginable power, they made no effort to hide their arrival. They wanted to be seen. They wanted humanity to cower beneath their overwhelming strength. The first signals were sent through the human networks, an unmistakable message, a demand for immediate surrender. Earth would become another colony of the Acrian people, a world to be exploited for resources. The humans who resisted were nothing but pests who would soon be eradicated. In the capital cities across the globe, chaos erupted. People watched in fear as their once impenetrable defenses crumbled before the alien invaders. Military installations were obliterated in seconds. Government buildings reduced to rubble. Entire fleets of fighter jets were vaporized in a flash. Humanity's technological advancements seemed nothing more than toys in the face of Acrian might. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, a strange defiance hung in the air. Humanity had always been a resilient species. They had survived countless trials, even when the world seemed to turn against them. And now, when it seemed like there was no hope, they dug in their heels and refused to submit. The resistance began almost immediately. Small pockets of survivors began to fight back. It was futile at first, a few dozen men and women with outdated firearms taking potshots at the invaders. But something unexpected happened. The Acrian were caught off guard by this tenacity. They had expected fear and surrender, but instead they found humans willing to die for their homes, their families, their way of life. The Acrian commanders couldn't understand it. Humans had no real weapons. They had no advanced technology. How were they able to hold on to this hope? One small group of human fighters managed to damage one of the Acrian ships. The explosion wasn't enough to destroy it, but it caused a vital power core to short out. The ship crashed down to Earth, creating a massive crater. It was a victory. Though small, it was enough to inspire others that the Acrian could be defeated, that the impossible could be made possible. News of the attack spread like wildfire through human networks. People started to talk. The Acrian were not invincible. In the wake of this attack, an unexpected event unfolded. An Acrian scientist named Huller, who had been studying human culture and history, began to look deeper into the human past. He had been tasked with understanding humanity's psyche in order to better control them. But as he sifted through ancient texts and artifacts, he found something strange, a pattern that didn't make sense to him. It wasn't just history he was looking at. It was something more, something older than any technology or weaponry. The language, it was ancient, forgotten by time. Yet it had a strange resonance with the present. It was not like any language the Acrian had encountered before. As Toller continued his research, he began to believe that there was something to this language, something that connected humanity to a force beyond his comprehension. The more he uncovered, the more he became convinced that humanity's power lay not in their technology, but in this lost and ancient form of communication. Yet the Acrian were blind to what humanity was capable of. Their arrogance clouded their judgment, and while they focused on their weapons and tactics, humanity began to awaken to something far more powerful than any alien invader could have imagined. Toller's curiosity grew as he delved deeper into the ancient human texts. He had found an obscure reference to a language known only to a handful of scholars. The texts were scattered and incomplete, but what he uncovered seemed to hold an undeniable power. The more Toller analyzed the symbols and sounds, the more he felt a strange connection, as if the language itself was alive, resonating with the very energy of the planet. It seemed to hold secrets of unimaginable depth. The texts spoke of forgotten rituals, lost wisdom, and a connection between humans and the earth itself. He couldn't explain it at first, but Toller became obsessed. He began translating the language piece by piece. Sometimes he could feel the language hum within him, as if it was awakening something deep inside his being. There were moments when he would chant certain words aloud, and the air would shift around him. A subtle vibration would ripple through the walls of his quarters. His instruments would flicker and buzz, and for the briefest instant, he would sense something more than the physical world around him. It was like the language tapped into some ancient human energy buried within the planet. As Toller made more progress with the translations, his theories began to solidify. He hypothesized that the language was more than just a means of communication. It was a conduit, a bridge to a deeper understanding of the universe itself. Humans had once spoken it fluently, and it had granted them unimaginable abilities that were now dormant, waiting to be rediscovered. The language was tied to their history, their evolution. It was the key to unlocking human potential. But why had it been forgotten? With his mind consumed by these thoughts, Toller reached out to his superiors. He presented his findings, but they were dismissive. They laughed at his theories and branded him a fool. They saw no value in ancient languages or rituals. To them, the only power that mattered was technology. They didn't care for the cultural mysteries of a primitive species. Toller was told to focus on the present, not the past, and he was dismissed from the research team. But he didn't stop his research. Despite the risks, Toller knew the truth was out there, and he would find it. In secret, he began experimenting with the language on his own. He started with small phrases, chanting them quietly in his quarters. At first, nothing happened. But over time, he began to notice strange things happening. The lights in his room would flicker as he spoke. The air would grow warmer. The hum of his equipment would shift from a low buzz to something sharper and more vibrant. His experiments grew bolder and more dangerous with each passing day. He was certain he had stumbled upon something immense and powerful, something that would change the course of the war between the Acrian and humanity. Toller wasn't the only one to notice the strange occurrences happening on Earth. The human resistance started to see unexplained phenomena. As well, small victories began to stack up against the invaders. Their weapons malfunctioned at crucial moments. Strange surges of energy seemed to emanate from human fighters. Suddenly, human morale skyrocketed, but the Acrians saw nothing more than luck or coincidence. Toller knew better. The language had begun to wake up, and it was only a matter of time before humanity would unlock its true potential. The more Toller experimented with the language, the more convinced he became that the power to defeat the Acrian didn't lie in brute force or advanced weaponry. It lay in the ancient language of humanity's ancestors, a language that could harness the very energy of the world itself. And if humanity could learn to speak it again, they would become unstoppable. But how could he share this knowledge with them before it was too late? Toller knew he was running out of time. The Acrian invasion was escalating. With each passing day, more cities were falling, more resistance groups were being wiped out. He had uncovered so much of the language, but he was just one being against an entire empire. Humanity needed to know what he had discovered. They needed to awaken to their potential. But how could he get the message out? Toller wasn't even sure if they would believe him. The Acrian would not tolerate rebellion, especially one sparked by a forgotten language. But he couldn't sit idly by while humanity faced annihilation. He began to secretly reach out to human resistance groups, using the ancient texts as a form of communication. He carefully crafted a message written in the language, but disguised it in such a way that only those with the knowledge could decipher it. He included references to human history and culture that would resonate with the resistance leaders. He hoped that someone would be able to understand the urgency of what he was trying to share, but even Toller wasn't sure it would work. The first response came in the form of a coded transmission from a group of human fighters. Located in a remote city, they had intercepted the message and decoded it using the fragments of ancient human texts they had discovered on their own. They were intrigued by the promise of something greater than their current weapons, something that could change the tide of the war. They had already heard whispers of strange occurrences in the battlefields, unexplained surges of power emanating from human soldiers during moments of great need. The resistance believed they had been tapping into the energy Toller had described, and now they wanted to learn more. The transmission was simple. It was a request to meet to learn the full extent of the language's power. Toller agreed and arranged a secret meeting with the leaders of the resistance. The location was remote, far from prying eyes and Acrian patrols. When Toller arrived at the rendezvous point, he was met by a small group of resistance fighters who were both wary and hopeful. They had come to learn the secret that would give them the edge they needed to win. Toller explained everything to them: the history of the language, its connection to humanity's ancestors, and its ability to unlock untapped power within every human being. He spoke of the forgotten knowledge buried deep within the human psyche and how it could change the world forever. But he also warned them that the language was not a simple tool to wield. It was a force that required discipline, understanding, and unity. They could not just speak the words without consequences. They had to learn how to channel the energy properly or risk losing control. The resistance leaders listened intently, absorbing every word Taller spoke. When he finished, they were silent for a long moment, the gravity of what he had revealed sinking in. They had always known there was something unique about humanity, something that set them apart from other species, but they had never imagined it was something this powerful. They were ready to take the next step. Taller began teaching them the language, starting with simple phrases and symbols. It was slow at first. The resistance fighters struggled to grasp the meanings, but as they practiced, the energy of the language began to manifest in small bursts. A soldier who had been struggling with his training suddenly found himself able to lift a heavy crate with ease. A sharpshooter's aim became unnaturally precise, and another soldier was able to heal minor wounds with a touch. It was just the beginning, but it was enough to show them that this was real. With each passing day, the resistance grew stronger. They began to train others, teaching them the ancient language and its potential. Soon the language spread beyond their small group, and humanity started to embrace it. The very act of speaking it changed them. It awakened something deep inside them that made them stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever before. And as the Acrian watched humanity's small victories begin to mount, they could no longer dismiss the strange power their enemies were wielding. The shift was unmistakable. The resistance was no longer a ragtag group of desperate survivors. They had become something far more formidable. They were united by the ancient language and the energy it unlocked within them. The Acrian had underestimated humanity's resilience, but now they were beginning to realize that humanity was no longer what they had once thought, a weak and primitive species. They were discovering a power unlike anything they had encountered before. The Acrian were not prepared for this. The balance of power was tipping, and they had no way to stop it. The first large-scale counteroffensive began when a group of resistance fighters, led by a seasoned commander named Cassius, launched an attack on an Acrian supply convoy in a remote region. The operation was supposed to be simple sabotage, but it turned into something much more. When the resistance fighters spoke the ancient words during the battle, their movements became fluid and synchronized. They fought with a precision that stunned even them. Their weapons seemed to hum with newfound energy. The Acrian soldiers were unprepared for the intensity of the attack. Their advanced technology was no match for the raw power the humans had awakened within themselves. The resistance struck with the force of a storm. Every victory fueled their resolve. They began to reclaim cities once thought lost and push the Acrian back. The invaders couldn't understand how the humans were able to coordinate so effectively, how their fighters were able to move with such speed and strength in battle. It was like nothing the Acrian had ever seen. And each time humanity used the ancient language, the power grew stronger. Taller knew that they were just scratching the surface of what was possible, but each victory brought them closer to understanding the true extent of the language's power. The Acrian tried to adapt. They increased patrols, tightened their grip on occupied territories, and began deploying more advanced weaponry. But it was futile. The more the humans used the language, the more they adapted their tactics, and their powers evolved with every battle. They learned to channel the energy of the language more precisely. It wasn't just physical strength they were gaining, it was mental clarity, emotional resilience. They began to heal faster, think clearer, and even communicate with each other more intuitively. It was like the language was attuning them to each other and to the world around them. In one critical battle, a group of resistance fighters infiltrated an Acrian stronghold deep behind enemy lines. They had no heavy artillery, no air support. They only had the power of the ancient language and their newfound abilities. The Acrian expected them to fail, but when the humans arrived on the battlefield, they were unstoppable. Their movements were guided by something beyond strategy. They were connected to each other and to the very essence of the earth itself. It was as if the planet itself was fighting alongside them. With each strike they made, with each word they spoke, the land seemed to respond beneath their feet. As the battle raged on, the Acrian commanders began to panic. Their forces were being overwhelmed by the sheer force of the human resistance, and yet they couldn't pinpoint why. They couldn't understand what was happening. The language was more than just a weapon. It was a force of nature, one that they couldn't control, one that was becoming more and more powerful with each passing day. Taller watched from the shadows as his teachings spread across the globe. More and more humans were awakening to the power of the ancient language. The resistance was growing stronger with each day, and the Acreon were beginning to realize that their victory on Earth was no longer a certainty. The humans had become a threat they could no longer dismiss. They were no longer the joke the Acreon had once believed them to be. The tide of battle had undeniably shifted. Humanity was no longer on the defensive. They had taken the initiative, and the Acreon were scrambling to adapt. Their once perfect strategy was now in tatters with every human victory. The Acreon were losing ground, but the invaders were not about to give up without a fight. They had underestimated the power of the ancient language, and now they were desperate to find a way to counter it. The humans had found something far beyond their technology, and it terrified them. The human resistance continued to grow in numbers and strength as more people began to embrace the ancient language. It was as if a wave of collective awareness was sweeping across the globe. Each new speaker added to the growing power of the language. Humanity was awakening to their potential, and with each awakening, the resistance grew more confident. They were no longer fighting a losing battle. They were fighting with a force that transcended anything the Acreon had ever encountered. The Acreon tried to fight back by deploying their most advanced weapons, but none of them seemed to have the same effect on the humans as they once did. The resistance fighters were no longer afraid of the Acreon technology. Their new abilities made them immune to the weapons that had once decimated human forces. Entire platoons of Acreon soldiers were wiped out in a matter of moments by human fighters who seemed to move as one with the power of the language flowing through them. It was as if the battlefield itself had become an extension of their will. The humans had become unpredictable. Their strategies were no longer based on conventional warfare. They were unpredictable, fluid, and relentless. They knew how to read the land, how to sense the energy around them. They could feel the presence of their enemies, even when they were hidden, and the Acreon were powerless to stop them. The humans were no longer relying on their weapons. They were using something far more ancient, far more powerful. The Acreon began to fear that the humans had unlocked a secret, that they had been blind to something that would make their technology obsolete. In response, the Acreon commanders decided to make a bold move. They launched a full-scale assault on the human stronghold in the last free city, the capital of the resistance. But the human fighters were ready the moment the Acreon ships appeared in the sky. The resistance mobilized with stunning speed. They didn't hesitate. They didn't waste time forming plans. Their actions were instinctive. It was as if they were all connected by some invisible thread. They moved as one. They spoke the language as one. And when they did, the world seemed to respond to their will. The battle was fierce. The Acreon threw everything they had at the humans. But it was no use. The humans fought with a passion and power that the Acreon had never seen before. They had tapped into something primal and unstoppable, and with every victory they became more confident. They knew the power of the language could not be contained, it could not be destroyed, it could only grow stronger. As the battle raged on, the Acreon leaders began to realize they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity. They had thought the humans would be an easy target. But now it was clear that the humans were no longer the weaklings they had once appeared to be. They had become something greater, something that no one could control, no one could defeat. Taller watched as the humans fought with everything they had. He had known this moment would come. He had known that the awakening of the language would change the course of history, and now the rest of the galaxy would know the true power of humanity. The Acreon fleet had been pushed back, but they were not defeated yet. The resistance had gained momentum, but the war was far from over. The invaders had been humiliated on the battlefield, and their leaders were furious. They could no longer ignore the humans. They had underestimated them for too long now. They were desperate to turn the tide and reclaim control. But what could they do against an enemy that was so unpredictable, so powerful? The Acreon began to shift their tactics. They stopped relying on brute force and began focusing on psychological warfare. They started spreading propaganda claiming that the humans were no more than pawns in a larger scheme, a species manipulated by a hidden force. They tried to sow distrust among the humans, make them question the very power they had discovered. The language was not something to be used lightly. They said it was dangerous, a tool that could destroy everything the humans had fought to protect. They warned that it would lead to their own downfall, that it was a weapon of destruction, not salvation. But the humans didn't falter. They had been through too much to be swayed by lies. They had seen the power of the language for themselves, and they knew what it could do. They had become a force to be reckoned with, and the Acreans' words fell on deaf ears. They were not afraid. They had no reason to doubt their own strength. They had seen what they could accomplish together, and they knew the language was not a curse, but a gift they were willing to fight for. The resistance began organizing on a larger scale. They had learned to communicate with each other in ways that were beyond the Acreans' understanding. Their movements were swift and coordinated. They had become like one entity, a force that couldn't be stopped. The language connected them, not only to each other, but to the planet itself. They could feel the earth beneath their feet respond to their every move. They could sense the flow of energy in the world and use it to their advantage. It was as if the entire planet was on their side. Taller knew that the time had come to take the fight directly to the heart of the Acrean Empire. He had discovered a way to amplify the language's power to transcend the limitations of the planet and reach out to the stars. The language wasn't bound to Earth. It was universal. It was a force that could be felt across the entire galaxy. He believed that if humanity could use the language on such a grand scale, they could cripple the very foundation of the Acrean Empire itself. They could strike at the heart of the invaders and bring their empire to its knees. But there was a risk. The power of the language was not fully understood, yet it was possible that pushing it too far could have unintended consequences. It could unravel the very fabric of reality itself, or worse yet, it could turn against them and destroy everything they had fought for. Taller was torn. He had seen the potential of the language, but he also understood its dangers. He had spent years unlocking its secrets, but now he wasn't sure if they were ready to wield it on such a massive scale. Still, the resistance leaders were resolute. They trusted Taller. They had seen what the language could do in the hands of those who truly understood it, and they were ready to take the next step. They had no choice. The Acrean were relentless. They would never stop until humanity was completely subdued. If they were going to win, they had to act now. They had to take the risk and hope that the power of the ancient language would be enough to tip the scales once and for all. The decision was made. The resistance would move forward with the plan, and they would do it together as one unified force. The time for hesitation was over. It was time to unleash the full power of humanity. The plan was set, and the resistance was more determined than ever. They had to strike quickly and decisively. They could no longer wait for the Acrean to regroup. If they hesitated for even a moment, the invaders would adapt, and once again, humanity would be forced to fight from the shadows. Taller had worked with the resistance leaders to formulate a strategy, one that would take them to the heart of the Acrean Empire. The time had come to use the ancient language in ways that had never been imagined before. They would send a message, a signal that would reverberate across the galaxy and make it impossible for the Acrean to ignore. The first step was to locate the central hub of the Acrean's power, a colossal city ship that orbited a distant planet. It was the command center from which the Acrean directed their entire empire. Its defenses were legendary, and the journey to reach it would be perilous. But Taller believed it could be done. They would need to infiltrate the city ship and use the language to disrupt its systems, to destabilize the control the Acrean had over the galaxy itself. Once they succeeded, the power of the language would spread outward like a shockwave, reaching across the stars. As the resistance prepared for the mission, they were filled with both fear and hope. They had already achieved so much, but this was different. This would be their most dangerous operation, yet their most important. The stakes had never been higher. They were not just fighting for their survival anymore. They were fighting for the very future of humanity and the galaxy. Taller stood among them as they gathered for the final briefing. He could feel the weight of the moment. The air seemed thick with anticipation. He could see the determination in their eyes, the belief that they could succeed despite the overwhelming odds. It was a feeling that had been missing for so long, a feeling of unity and purpose that the Acrean had never expected from humans. They had thought they could break humanity's spirit, but instead they had awakened something far more powerful than the invaders had ever dreamed of. The plan was simple on the surface, but the execution would require perfect coordination. Every resistance fighter had been trained to use the ancient language to amplify their abilities. The battle would begin as soon as they entered the orbit of the city ship. They would need to disable its defenses before making their way into the heart of the ship itself. The language would be their weapon, their shield, and their guide. They would have to rely on it completely, for without it, they would be overwhelmed by the sheer power of the Acrian. As the fleet of human ships made its way toward the Acrian city ship, Taller couldn't help but feel a mixture of dread and hope. He knew what they were about to do could change everything. If they succeeded, the Acrian Empire would collapse. If they failed, the entire human race would be wiped out. But there was no turning back now. The moment the first shot was fired, the Acrian realized they were under attack, but they were unprepared for the scale of the assault. They had expected a small resistance force, not an entire fleet that fought with the ferocity and power of an unstoppable force. The humans didn't just fight to survive, they fought with purpose. They fought to win. They fought because they believed in something greater than themselves. Taller watched as the resistance made their way through the Acrian defenses. Their movements were fluid and precise, as if they were guided by some unseen force. The power of the ancient language surged through them. With every step, with every word they spoke, it was as if they were rewriting the very rules of combat with the force of their will and the language that bound them together. They reached the heart of the city ship, and the final battle began. The Acrian commanders tried to rally their forces, but it was too late. The humans had already tapped into a power beyond the comprehension of their invaders. Their language had become their weapon, and the Acrian had no defense against it. The heart of the Acrian city ship trembled as humanity's power surged through it. Resistance fighters moved with a precision that felt almost otherworldly. The language they spoke resonated through every corner of the massive structure. It wasn't just the walls or the machines that hummed with energy. It was everything: the air, the very ground beneath their feet. The Acrian tried to fight back, but it was no use. Their technology faltered, their systems overloaded under the weight of the energy humanity had unleashed. Taller had known this was possible, but seeing it happen was overwhelming. The sheer force of the ancient language working in unison was like nothing the galaxy had ever experienced. The very essence of the universe seemed to bend to humanity's will. As the final barrier protecting the core of the city ship fell, Taller felt the atmosphere shift around him. He knew they were about to do it. They were about to strike at the very heart of the Acrian Empire. They were about to change the course of history forever. The resistance had reached the central control room of the city ship, and the Acrian were in full retreat. But the damage had been done. The language had already begun to destabilize the entire system. Taller stood in awe as humanity's power spread like a wave, crashing against everything that once seemed untouchable. He stepped forward and raised his hands to the central console. He didn't need to look at the controls. He knew what he had to do. His voice echoed through the control room. As he spoke the words of the language, the room responded. The Acrian systems began to flicker and shut down. It wasn't just a signal they were sending, it was a command. The language was rewriting the way the city ship functioned. It was rewriting the way the entire Acrian Empire operated, and with each word Taller spoke, the Empire's power unraveled further. The Acrian commanders tried to fight back. They unleashed their last reserves of power, but it was futile. Nothing could stop what was happening. Taller's voice grew stronger as the resistance fighters around him chanted in unison, their words carrying the weight of humanity's collective will. The Acrian had underestimated the power of the human spirit. They had underestimated the power of unity, and now they were paying the price. The central core of the city ship began to collapse. The Acrian systems faltered and died. Their once mighty empire was no longer capable of holding the galaxy in its grip. Humanity's language had become the weapon that shattered their control. Taller looked around the room and saw the faces of the resistance fighters. They were exhausted, but there was a look of triumph in their eyes. They had done it. They had taken the fight to the heart of the Acrian Empire and emerged victorious. Outside the city ship, the human fleet watched in awe as the Acrian Empire began to crumble one world at a time. The language had done what no weapon could. It had torn down the foundation of the invaders' control over the galaxy, and humanity had emerged as the true force to be reckoned with. Taller could feel the pulse of the language in the air. The energy was still flowing through them. It was alive, and it was growing stronger. The people of Earth had unlocked something far greater than they had ever known, and now they had the power to shape their own future. The Acrian no longer had the strength to fight back. Their empire was falling apart, and humanity stood as the dominant force in the galaxy. Taller knew there was still much to be done. The war had ended, but the journey was just beginning. They had proven themselves capable of unimaginable power, but with that power came great responsibility. Humanity had unlocked an ancient secret that would change the universe forever, and now they had to decide how to use it, how to protect it, and how to ensure that it would never again be forgotten. As Taller looked out at the stars, he knew that humanity's future was brighter than ever. The ancient language was no longer a relic of the past. It was the foundation for their future, a future that they would build together, united by the power of their shared history, their shared strength, and their shared will.